Well, here we are. Who'd have thought I was ever gonna get to this point? And, I wonder if anybody's actually here. It said I had 2 people waiting. But anyways oh, wait, there's 3. Anyways, everybody, welcome, Submarine History. I'm your host, Steve, and, this is our sorry, this is the first time I'm doing this, so, welcome to the 500 subscriber, question and answer session. Okay, Charles, nice to meet you. But while we do this stream, I have no idea how long we're gonna do this. But I think basically it works like this. Go ahead and type and ask any questions you have. I'll try to answer them. And if I can't answer them, which is probably going to be most of the questions that I can't answer, I'll have the transcript. And then what I will do is I will try to look up answers for that stuff, and then I'll do another video that'll just be a voiceover, but I'll answer those questions and stuff. So, um, but anyways, why don't we do this? We're just kind of getting warmed up. Um, so I have a so we have a subscriber. He goes by R underscore Rob, and he hang on, I'm getting a text message. What is this? What could this be? It's buffering. It keeps buffering. Might need to check running processes. So I'm hearing that the video is not that the audio or the video is not smooth because I'm on Ethernet. It shouldn't be a problem. But if anybody else is watching, just type something in chat and let me know what the quality of the audio and video is like. Because I tested this today, but I didn't test it with the Blue Yeti mic. I tested just using my headphones, and I would rather not unplug audio right now because I don't know if that's going to disrupt the stream. But until somebody else types in chat that the audio sucks and they can't understand me, then I'm just going to assume that people can hear okay, and that I'm coming over all right, even if it's not working out for Charles, who's in my warships clan, by the way. So, but anyways, so as far as like a Q&A goes, you can ask me whatever you want. If you want to talk about submarine history, if you want to talk about cryptography, if you want to talk about world of warships, if there's other things that are maybe not too far off of submarines that you want to talk about, we can certainly do that. Okay, so we have one question here. Why were German torpedoes much more successful than U.S. torpedoes? With that, hang on. Oh, that's the problem. Audio is fine. Doesn't seem to be buffering anymore. Okay. Oh, that's nice. My wife is watching my live stream. Love you. Thank you. Is that support or what? Okay. I don't have a moderator tonight, so if this goes well, the next time I would do that, next time if I do this again, then the next time I do it, I'll try to have a moderator who can actually moderate the feed and send me the questions. Okay, Jay Nelson call. Okay, it was bad, but it is better. Okay, I think someone in the house was doing some streaming or other stuff that was kind of affecting the bandwidth. Okay, why were German torpedoes much more successful than U.S. torpedoes? We'll come back to that. Let's do this first, though. So like I said, I have a subscriber, R underscore Rob. He's from Europe. He couldn't be here for the live stream, but he had a question. So I'm going to read it, right? Is there anything with the then available resources the Germans could have done to either avoid defeat in the Atlantic or delay it? Ooh. Um, so there's a short answer and then there's a long answer. But I'm kind of curious if anybody watching the stream has an opinion on what, if anything, the Germans could have done to have better results in the Battle of the Atlantic. And just make sure this. I'm just going to keep this phone over here so in case I get texted. Okay. Um, so let me give you the short answer. And the short answer is there is nothing Germany could have done to ultimately win the Battle of the Atlantic. And why I say that and why I say that so easy and so confidently, it's like this. It's called the industrial might of the United States. And I'm going to give you a quick example. Okay. I recently, like this past holiday season, I lost my dad. He passed away, and he was in the army in the mid 50s. He was actually in Korea in like 57 and 58. Um, but when I was going through his things, I found this photo. So right here, and you notice he's a handsome chap, but this is a staged photo at Fort Lewis, and the photo is staged to give the illusion that the soldier is on the deck of a ship. And what they did at Fort Lewis, Washington, this would have been the embarkation point for U.S. soldiers going to Korea at that time, or one of them. So they just had this prop background, and they just ran the soldiers all the way through. Pictures. Send it home to the folks, let them know that their boy's doing right. But on a whim, I was curious if there was maybe a Liberty ship called the Fort Lewis. So I actually went on. The long answer is what we talked about with conflict. Yeah. So anyways, I was kind of curious to see if I could find a Liberty ship named Fort Lewis. And what I realized is that there were, we made 2,700 Liberty ships during World War II. Okay, so I want you to think about that. 2,700 Liberty ships. The United States produced probably in like 3 years. And that's the reason that Germany would ultimately never be able to to win the Battle of the Atlantic. Because if push came to shove, we would have built so many ships. We would have had a ship like on every square mile between New York and London. And there wouldn't have been any way for U-boats to do anything anyways. And I think this is a quote. I think it's attributed to Clay Blair, the American author who is considered to have written the 2 definitive books on Kriegsmarine, U-boat operations in World War II. But his attitude is, and I haven't read his books, although I have the sense that he's kind of like a really arrogant and conceited guy. But his attitude was basically that it just didn't matter. Like the U-boats could all go out into the middle of the Atlantic. They could completely destroy a convoy, sink 100 ships. But while they were doing that, 10 other convoys have already crossed the Atlantic and supplied England with the war material that they need. So, that's kind of the short. So that's kind of the short answer. The the better answer, or the better way to look at the problem is you have from September 1st, 1939 until the end of November 1941, you have what, 27 months? You have 27 months to win the Battle of the Atlantic. You have to win it. You have to get Britain to a point where they are going to, concede and drop out of the war, sign an armistice, sign a treaty with the Germans. You have to do it. You have to do it by the end of November 1941 because when Pearl Harbor happens, not only do we enter the war, but I think it's the British mindset is going to be totally different. Whereas before, from September 1939, through 40, going into 41, with all this success, with every success and advance of the German military, it makes it that much harder for British morale to stay high enough where they're going to continue the war. So even if it's going down, okay, as soon as we enter the war, boom, it goes back up because the British know it's just a matter of time before we come across the Atlantic and save them. Which is what we did. So you have to think about it in terms of, okay, how do we win that war in 27 months? And that's and when you look at it like that, it's still really, really tough. And I'll tell you why it's really, really tough. These are just some notes that I was going through. A couple of years ago, I had pitched a story idea to somebody else who runs a naval history channel, and I pitched a story idea to him about doing a piece, me writing it, and us collaborating on it about the Battle of the Atlantic. And I was just going through the notes for that piece that I had written that was never used, but and these were just some of the things really off the top of my head. These are the challenges that the Germans had, okay, at the start of the war. So they didn't have enough U-boats. Right? I think they had, I think the number's 57. And Dönitz was thinking he needed 300 submarines to have enough boats on station patrolling, traveling back and forth, and then, about a third of the boats in port at any given time being overhauled, upgrades and stuff. So they didn't have enough U-boats. You did not have the Germans did not have like a combined arms or any intra-service coordination. Okay, you hear combined arms a lot on the Army side of the house, and combined arms being your infantry working with your armor, working with your artillery, working with your close support, all these elements working together to achieve a goal. You hear about that a lot on the land side with armies. I don't think you necessarily hear that so much on the Navy side. I'm not sure why, but in Germany's case, they had an insufficient surface fleet. It was too small. It was never going to contest the waters, from the British. You didn't have an organic naval air arm. You had a small group within the Luftwaffe who was supplying aviators to support the naval mission, and those were the 200, the Condor 200s, I believe. But it was not really a well put together plan. There were problems with, between the Kriegsmarine and the Luftwaffe working together, and really what the Kriegsmarine needed, they needed their own dedicated air arm that could train and be effective with surface and subsurface units. They didn't have anything like that, so you need what I guess we would call this triad. You need your air element, you need a surface element, surface and subsurface element, and then you need to have the communication security. And with regards to communications security, honestly, the Germans relied too much on Enigma during the war. The Germans were the first to employ radio communication and encrypted radio communication on a very large scale to achieve their tactical needs on the battlefield and at sea. And I've done this series on Enigma and the code machines and cryptography. We'll probably do a little bit more. But the problem with any mechanical ciphering system is that in order for that system to be secure and have the highest probability of not being broken or compromised, is every message that is sent, the protocols and the policies and the controls have to be used by the operator each and every time without exception. And that is very difficult when you're doing this kind of like encryption on a very large scale, where you're sending thousands and thousands and thousands of messages a month. Mistakes get made with operators, and with those mistakes become inroads to the code breakers being able to figure out what's in that message. Another problem for Germany was sonar and radar, but those weren't insurmountable problems. They were not insurmountable problems. Sonar and radar provided certainly advantages, but they weren't foolproof technologies. These are technologies that are still in development. They're new technologies. Operators don't have a lot of experience with them, and that takes time. So that does actually kind of degrade the effectiveness of those systems. Plus to be able to produce those systems and get them installed in ships and planes. But honestly, the bigger problem for the Germans was uh, high frequency direction finding, what's called Huffduff. And that was the mechanical antenna. There were four antennas that was set in an array and had the properties where if someone was transmitting, the Huff Duff unit could like instantaneously triangulate and figure out the direction of the source of that signal. And that was even more so than sonar radar. That was I think that was a much more serious problem for the Germans, and it took them the longest to understand about Huff Duff because there were points in the war where planes were shot down and they saw, okay, these are the kind of radar transmitters that the British are using now. So we'll just build something that counters that, or at least we'll build something that can detect those, that frequency range and stuff. But Huff Duff was different. Huff Duff was really deadly. It was really deadly. The Germans did have faulty torpedoes. Their problem didn't last as long as the Americans, but they did in the first couple of years of the war. They did have problems, and that's really about. I mean, and I've read the story a couple times, but I really don't remember much. I will be doing this year. I'll be doing like some like technical series like on torpedoes and things like sonar and radar. We'll be talking about those technologies in general, and then we'll get into talking about the specific problems that the Germans had with their torpedoes and the Americans. How those problems were the same and different, the two approaches that were taken to solving the problem, and how things were finally resolved. So other problems that Germany had, you had improved convoy tactics, as the war progresses. You have the formation of the anti-submarine warfare, the hunter killer groups, which would be like an escort carrier with a group of surface combatants, and they would just kind of, they would have ranges of the ocean that they would patrol, or they would like shadow convoys. But with that, you had a dedicated group of ships that were going to do nothing but fight U-boats. Because if you were an escort, if you're a destroyer escort, if you're a destroyer, if you're a sloop or a corvette, and you're guarding a convoy, if you come into contact with the U-boat, you'll break off and you'll attack that U-boat, probably with the goal of just driving that U-boat off to get you some space and time so that your convoy can change course and get away. But as that escort ship, your job is to stay with that convoy. So with the hunter killer groups, now you have a group of ships that they don't have to worry about getting back with the merchant ships and ferrying them, over to London, because there are already other ships doing that. Here I'm in command of my hunter killer group with my baby flat top and a bunch of highly specialized surface ships for anti-submarine warfare. And we're going to find that sub, and we're just going to stay on top of it for like up to 72 hours, because they know that's 72 hours is basically the endurance limit for most submarines of that period of time to be underwater. Okay, since at that time you weren't manufacturing your own oxygen, all you could do was remove carbon dioxide from the air and maybe bleed in a little pure oxygen that you had stored on the boat. So as a surface ship, if I can keep contact with that submarine for 72 hours, even if I don't sink him with depth charges, there's going to come a point he's just going to have to surface, and then we'll deal with him at that point. And I don't have to worry about where the convoy, and the escorts and stuff are. They're off doing their own thing. Another problem that the Germans had, it was FIDO. It was the passive acoustic aerial drop torpedoes that the Allies developed. And then probably, another just thing I was thinking about off the top of my head, as the war progresses and you lose U-boats and you lose crews, your crew quality, it starts to degrade as the war progresses. As the war progresses, there's more and more pressure, get more and more boats out into the water as quickly as possible, and training starts to get compromised. And this is This is very evident during Black May, where most of the U-boats that were sunk, it was like their first combat patrol, you know? So so you have all those problems that you have to deal with in order to make the U-boat arm in and of itself more effective, but really without the other supporting elements, without the planes to actually spot, and without the support from surface ships, I mean, there's just only so much you can do with submarines because at that period of time, they're just, they're just, they're too slow. They can't stay underwater long enough. You don't have the sophistication and the weapons that you probably really need. If there was one thing that could probably could have improved Germany's chances and maybe at least delayed the inevitable, um, they probably at the start of the war they needed a long distance torpedo, and by long distance I mean something they can probably like launch at like a 5 kilometer range, and that torpedo has the guidance and stuff within itself that it can just guide itself to a target so that you can fire it and then you can just pop smoke and get out of dodge. But you need like that I feel like you need that 5 kilometer buffer from the time that you launch. You've got like a 5 kilometer head start on the escorts, and maybe they even wouldn't know where you were, especially if you're using the G70 electric torpedoes. Um, but probably probably like the pattern searching torpedoes in the passive acoustic homing torpedoes, that would have made a difference at the start of the war. Especially I think the pattern surfing torpedoes, there could have been the potential for doing a lot more damage, you know. Um, that would have helped. Um, better radio discipline with Enigma would have helped. And then, probably, like I said, an organic naval air arm that would have been very helpful. But like I said, really, in the end, it may have drugged things out a bit, maybe another year. But ultimately, you just given enough time, the United States would have just built a bridge, over the Atlantic, and they just would have driven everything, over there. Um, Probably something that we couldn't do today anymore. As a nation, I don't think we would have the ability just to like allocate resources to build like that. But that's how they did it back then. Okay, so let's go through here. So why were German torpedoes much more successful than US torpedoes? Let me think about that one. Also the British gaming out. Yeah, that is true with regards to the Battle of the Atlantic. Also, the British gaming out scenarios to figure out tactics. I haven't heard about the German Navy gaming out scenarios like the Brits did. Yeah, that was now we're getting into the field an area of mathematics called operations research. And the British were really good about employing operations research to get a handle on the successfulness of the things that they were doing, and then to use mathematics and statistics to figure out how they could improve things. And I think that was something that was one of the many things that was forward looking about the British during the war, um, about the, about the use of mathematics, right? Because operations research was definitely important with regards to the convoys, but these were same kind of principles were applied at Bletchley Park to the solving of Enigma messages. So, all right. Okay. Well, I don't see any more questions, but we can continue on with this question about the Battle of the Atlantic. So we spent some time. We talked about all the problems that the Germans were facing. Okay. So what were some of the edges or advantages that they had? And these are probably areas maybe on which they could have capitalized to make improvements. But they did have the M4 Enigma, And that particular four rotor machine, with its key sheets and stuff, as long as the operators followed protocol, those messages coming out of the M4 Enigma were extremely difficult for Bletchley Park to crack, especially if they did not have a good crib or an idea of what was in that message. Like if someone just put a message on their desk and they're like, "We have no idea where this came from. We have no idea like what kind of keywords could possibly be in this message." If like at Bletchley Park, they literally had to take this message cold and try to break it, they would probably just, you know, file 13, we'll get to it when we can. We've got other messages that we know we can crack, and we're going to work on those. So it wasn't that Bletchley Park cracked Enigma and therefore they read 100% of German communications of all branches of services, of all types of machines, like all the time. It didn't actually work like that. At least it didn't work like that for Naval Enigma. It could be like that for Naval Enigma M3. Okay, that machine was a little bit easier to crack simply because it was a three rotor machine. But the four rotor M4, yeah, it was really special. They were able to, I mean, they were able to crack those messages, but it took some time, and there were times when they just, they just couldn't do it. So, so they did have Enigma M4, so that was definitely an advantage for them. Another advantage they had was the crush depth for U-boats. It was considerably deeper than other nations. I mean, they could go down to, you know, 250 or 300 meters, and really nobody else was doing that. Um, and that depth, being able to get to that depth when you could get to that depth, that could be a real advantage for you. Not only because deep water is going to lessen the impact of depth charges, but the deeper you go, the more potential you have for thermoclines and stuff, which will help to obscure you from sonar. Let's see, another advantage for Germany. It was the U-boat form factor. They were smaller boats. They had smaller conning towers. These were boats that were designed to have a low surface profile. They were intended to be used at dusk and at night, when they would be very difficult to pick out from the background. You look at you look at U.S. boats. I mean, those things are huge. They're huge. Um, they didn't have the stealthy form factor that the Kriegsmarine employed. Let's see. So what were some of other Germany's edges? They did have Wolfpack tackets. They did have that. They were forward-looking. They were the first ones to actually embrace that, and they had success. And they had success with it, which of course was countered by Huffduff. Since in order for Wolfpack to work, you have to have frequent communication between the boats. But Germany would end up having an answer to that. We'll get to that in a second here. Other edges Germany had. You know what? Even though they came at the end of the war, we'll say the Type 21 and the Type 23 boats. You know, um, Too late to really make an impact on the war. I mean, they didn't. They didn't even like that project. Didn't even get the Type 21 project. Didn't even really get greenlit until the summer of '43. So it wouldn't really be fair to pull those forward to 1939 and say, oh, if Germany had 300 of these, they just would have kicked ass. Um, but what was important about the Type 21 and Type 23, because what was important about those boats is that Germany was working towards that, working towards those technologies way before anybody else was. Um, So I know that's a hypothetical edge, I guess, not really a practical one. They did have the G7E torpedo. This was the electrically driven torpedo, and the advantage of that torpedo was that it didn't really generate a bubble wake, so it would be very difficult for lookouts to spot those torpedoes. And as far as I know, Germany was the only one doing that in at that you know in World War II. In fact, the U.S. developed their electric torpedoes from the G7Es that unexploded ones that, like, they washed up, on the Carolina beaches, during drumbeat. Um, the pattern searching torpedoes, those are the fat and loot torpedoes. That was an edge. It would have been interesting to see if they would have had those in 1939, 1940, 1941. It would have been interesting to see the potential impact those could have if they were employed on a large scale. Um, they also had the passive acoustic homing torpedoes. That was the Falk, the Falk and the Zaun Koning, the T4 and T5 torpedoes. Those were the passive acoustic torpedoes that would lock on to a high speed sound signature that like a merchant convoy escort might generate, and they could self guide to the target, and and take that escort out. Um, and then finally, probably like the last edge that Germany gets, it's like snorkels and the courier message system. Snorkels are important because it enables this new age where U-boats can basically stay underwater continuously. Okay, this is important because it. I think Germany lost more U-boats from aircraft traveling to and from patrol areas than actually being in patrol areas and getting sunk by convoy escorts. By far and away, aircraft were the biggest threat to U-boats, massively bigger. And being able to snorkel and stay underwater, um, it was a game changer. But it just they implemented the technology too late. Um, Another thing that was interesting that could have potentially changed the game, it was the courier message system. And this was a burst messaging system that was developed, right. It had been in testing for a couple years. It finally makes it to the fleet like right before the end of the war. But it was a special radio transmitter. It was like this drum, and it had like 80 pins on it. And using a special code book, you could program these 80 pins on this drum. Each pin representing a letter or a phrase or something. And then you push a button, this thing spins, and in milliseconds, it generates these light pulses that get transmitted, and it'll get picked up by special receiving equipment where they will do a couple levels of interpretation of or transformation of the message to get a radio message. But what was important about courier was that um, they could this burst transmission would last a couple milliseconds, and because of that, it wasn't enough time for Huff Duff to actually triangulate. So that's something that so that's something that if you have M4 Enigma at the start of the war, and if you're using it correctly, um, if you have the pattern searching torpedoes, if you have the acoustic homing torpedoes, if you have the snorkels, if you have the courier message system, if you have all that stuff, front load that all that stuff up front to the start of the war. Let's leave out the Type 21 and Type 23 boats. Would that have made U-boats more effective? Yeah, although you wouldn't have really needed all that technology at the start of the war because the Germans were doing just fine. It's really not until the first thing that really kind of tips the scale. It begins to be the employment of radar on reconnaissance aircraft. That kind of starts this slow downhill slide. But apart from that, um, it all these other things. If you had all that stuff forward, would it have made a difference? I think it would have made a difference. Like I said, you just couldn't do enough damage because really what you need to do is, in my opinion, if you're going to try to use U-boats to win the war, I think the goal has to be you have to starve England of oil, of crude oil, because they could produce their own food. I mean, I've heard stories just about every farmable square yard of land in England was farm during the Second World War just so they could produce enough food to feed themselves. So you're not going to starve England with food, um, but you could starve them with oil. Like they can build a million ships, but if they don't have the oil to run the boilers, that's a problem. So while tankers were always high value targets, and if you were a U-boat captain and you were on a patrol and found a convoy, you would hope that there were tankers in there and they would be your priority. But the question then becomes, do you have the ability to track and figure out where all these tankers are so you can go and sink them? That's pretty tough because even though the Germans were breaking, our cipher machines, like while we were breaking theirs, um, the question becomes, are you able to get the kind of intelligence you need so that you could kind of focus your U-boats where you want? Because I tell you, when you read books about when you read personal accounts by people who served on U-boats, when they recite like their combat actions and stuff, you hear a lot about like we sank this freighter in the Caribbean that was carrying 10,000 crates of bananas. And while it's nice you sunk a merchant ship that was carrying 10,000 crates of bananas, that's really not as good as sinking a tanker with maybe 10,000 tons of oil in it. But you're at that stage where the convoys are blind, they don't know where you are, but at the same time you're blind, you don't know where the convoys are. It's not like we got satellites swinging around the sky and we're tracking all these ships so we know exactly where to place our boats in order to do the most damage. So that was definitely the long answer, but at least it got us through 30 minutes of live stream, so that works. Let's see here, what else? Yeah, you're talking about it was the group of women that gamed it out and figured out one of the tactics. Yeah, so, what we're talking about in England, it's, I forgot the facility in England. Is it the Western Approaches? There's a museum there, but I'm not really familiar with, Royal Navy structure, but, there was one location where, the Royal Navy was operating out of, where they were tracking convoys and U-boats and stuff on these huge maps and walls and tables and stuff. But they had the Wrens. It was Royal Navy Women's Auxiliary. It's kind of like our WACs, here in the United States during the Second World War. But they had all these. So they had all these Wrens, all these female soldiers, working um, at this location, which I think is, yeah, I don't want to like try to like start googling now, but the Western, I think it's the Western Approaches Museum in England right now. It's where the U-534 is. But the Wrens were the ones who were moving all the convoys and U-boats around on maps, and through that work, they were observing certain things that U-boats were doing, and that like the officers who were like managing the war games and stuff, like things that they really weren't aware about because maybe they're only doing this once in a while, where the Wrens are working with this stuff every day. But that is actually true that yeah, these female soldiers, just by virtue of doing the work that they were doing and observing, they were able to greatly assist and improve the work that the Royal Navy was doing with their wargaming. So that was so Rob. Hopefully that answered your question. But yeah. So here we are. We've been in this for 39 minutes. Well, while we're here, so let me tell you what I'm thinking here in the near future. Things that I want to do. I'm currently finishing up the briefing for the Type 9 U-boat. I thought I was going to have that recorded and ready to go by this Friday, but I may not. I may save it for. I'll probably save it for maybe like the 27th because I'm going to be out of town this weekend. Um, so I want to finish the Type 9 U-boat briefing, and then after that, like I said, I think I want to maybe like start some technical series where we talk about torpedoes for 2 or 3 episode or briefings. Talk about spotting, talk about radar, talk about sonar, those things. There's some human interest and personal profile briefings I want to record. Those would be on subjects kind of like, DUNITs. They would be on U-boat, captains, significant, figures in U-boats, but also, U.S. and other countries too. I spent the last year mostly focusing on U-boats. One, because that was of immediate interest to me, and I figured, I'm going to do more research and be more, eager to get things done if it's something that's really personally interesting. Um, and I already had a little bit of knowledge, so it wasn't like I was starting from zero. But now that I've been doing that for a year, this summer I started to kind of like segue into U.S. submarines with the series on the Hunley. So this year we'll be spending some time looking at U.S. boats in American submarine operations, in addition to continuing to explore U-boats and what they were all about. And then I would like to start to get into some other nations. In addition to that, um, I've got some feelers out to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. I'd like to try to get in there to their records room to see the documents and stuff that they have for the U-505. Someone that I've collaborated in the past here on this, Jerry Mason, who runs the uboatarchive.net website. He and we were emailing recently and talking about the U-505. And, he's been in their records room. It was a long time ago. And, he's out on the West Coast in Canada now. But, I'm only 6 hours from Chicago. So I emailed them last week. I haven't heard back, which I don't know. That's not uncommon. I'll give it a little bit more time, and then I'll email them again, and then maybe I'll follow up with a phone call. And then another potential road trip would be to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Portsmouth, at the end of the war, a number of U-boats were war prizes for the United States. So they came over to Portsmouth, and it's a submarine-oriented base. And the U.S. took these German U-boats and they put them through their paces for a couple of years and wrote like a bunch of technical reviews on German technology and what could they take they could incorporate into American designs and what was garbage. But they supposedly have like a warehouse with just like tons and tons of information related to U-boats and stuff. And that is that was the other thing I was talking with Jerry about was is there a way we could get out to Portsmouth and review the historical documentation they have, with the idea of getting like photocopying some of that information and just making sure that it stays preserved and stuff. So so those are two things, kind of looking forward to potentially being able to do this year. And then I don't know. As I get some decent matches, I'll probably do some more warships replays. It's just something a little different. If you like submarines, but maybe you don't have the wherewithal to download and install Silent Hunter 3. Or maybe you just don't want to have a game where you got to invest 40 hours to figure out how to raise the periscope or dive. With World of Warships, you can just jump into you can jump into a Type 9 a Type 9, C-40, C/40 U-boat, or you can, step into a, Palau, and, you can dive, and, you can be sneaky and shoot torpedoes and stuff. And then it only takes 20 minutes of your time. So, oh, good. So, Edward, thank you. So the chat video is fine. Okay, that's good. I was really worried. That was the other thing. Since I started this channel, the audio has been consistently a weak spot for me. I had a, I have a Rode shotgun mic, that you use on a video camera. I have that, and then I have this Turtle Beach, and there was too much background hiss, and the acoustics in the room were really bad. Working with that mic and working with this headset, and I was having the audio quality was just up and down from one video to the next. Some of the audio was just terrible. I actually wanted to take down videos that I had put up. Um, but I have that fixed now. And actually, starting with the last upload I did, which was the USS Salmon, that World of Warships replay, I have a Blue Yeti microphone, and this thing is amazing. It's like perfect sound quality, and it only cost me like $60 because I had an Amazon gift certificate. Normally, this mic is like $129. I mean, I've talked to people who spent like thousands of dollars on microphones, just to do this kind of stuff, and you don't need to. So I'm really excited about this year of just being able to produce quality audio, more than anything else, especially for me, since like 90% of the stuff I do, it's basically it's a PowerPoint slide presentation, So really, audio becomes everything. Um, Trying to think what else. But I guess trying to maybe just to close out the question on the Battle of the Atlantic, what I would say for anybody who's interested in the Battle of the Atlantic, Black May, and man, I got to figure out how to flip the video, how to mirror this so I don't get this problem. But um, Black May, it's by Michael Gannon, and it's the epic story of the Allies' defeat of the German U-boats in May 1943. Excellent book. Michael Gannon is he's part of that canon of authors who covered U-boats in World War II, and he's an American. But what's really great about this book, I mean, not only does he just talk about Black May, but he kind of covers the Battle of the Atlantic from the start of the war, and he presents the information in a pretty easy to read fashion, and it's very, very thorough. It's like if you only ever had to read one book about the Battle of the Atlantic in World War II, it would be this book. Absolutely. So, yeah, new system and better quality. Mic is much better now. That's right. Yeah, I have a brand new laptop too, so I had that going for me. So what other things do we want to do here at Submarine History Channel? I want to do more cryptography, and I'd like to actually get into what the Americans were doing during the Second World War, with as far as like the Japanese ciphers, the code purple and stuff, and then even spend some time like talking about like Germany's efforts to break the Allied ciphers, which they were able to do. As I understand it, really up until about like mid 1943, the Germans were breaking like the British typex ciphers all the time. Just like Bletchley Park was owning, Army and Air Force Enigma. But cryptography is interesting with its applications to the Battle of the Atlantic and in U-boats. It was just really kind of fascinating. Not be so cocky about Enigma and realize that it had been compressed. It was. Let's see. Are you reviewing any new books for Naval Institute? I haven't gotten any books from them lately, but I have some books that I think I'm just going to do my own reviews on them. I can do that, and I'm allowed to use like without getting permission from USNI. I think I'm allowed to use up to like 3 photos from a book. But if I wanted to use more, they'd probably be okay with it. Um, so yeah, I'll do some book reviews again. But yeah, and not be so cocky about Enigma and realize it had been compromised. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it had yeah, I mean, the way the Germans implemented it, yeah. You had the vision that the German cipher bureaus, would have had as to how the machines should be employed, and then you had the reality how the machines were actually implemented, and, there was just too much human error. There was just too much human error. And I was talking and before this live stream, I was actually talking to some people who've got some cred in the field of cryptography. And because I was asking them the question, I said, well, like today, like the United States has adopted the AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard. Okay, and this is like I don't know if it's open source or if I think AES, the algorithm, I think it's all in the public domain. But AES is an encryption standard that everybody knows about it. Everybody knows how it works. And as long as you keep your keys secret and safe, messages can't be broken. They can. The key space is just it's too enormous. Even with I'm being told even with like NSA supercomputer capability, they're still talking to break, anything encrypted with AES, like, hundreds of years. But I bring that up because these people that I was talking to, their point was today, as it was back in World War II, the problem was that you had to keep the keys secret and safe, and that was a that was a problem for Germany. U-boats would get captured, weather boats would get captured. And each time that happened, that presented an opportunity for the Allies to get a hold of sets of key sheets that they could then use because everybody knew what the Enigma machine was. Everybody knew the design. Everybody understood how it operated. It was just that the success of using the unit depended on, your key security and using proper radio procedures. And the Germans broke the British Typex, but not the US. Yeah, I don't think that's one of those things. I mean, to my knowledge, I don't know that any of our ciphers were broken during the war. And I'm not really sure. It would have been important in the Pacific. You got these huge distances. But really, from the East Coast United States to England, I mean, you had undersea cables. So you could use that for secure communication. In fact, undersea cables were used when Bletchley Park, when the United States started building their own bombs, um, at least some of that work was done by NCR down in Dayton, probably down at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. We were building bombs, and the British what they would do is they would send messages to the United States for us to break for them because all their bombs were busy with work, so they would send their excess work, over here. But they would actually, when they would send them, when they would send a message to the United States to decrypt, okay, they would actually take that message and they would encrypt it with a one-time pad, and then they would send that through the Atlantic cable to the United States, where then they would decode the one-time pad, and then they would have the encoded message they could try to break. Then they would do the one-time pad, send it back to England, rinse and repeat. So it's possible that as a nation, we were not in a position where we were using our rotor-based encryption machines enough where any useful information could have been derived from them. This was the key with Enigma. The key with Enigma was that you were sending hundreds to thousands of messages today. I think on average, you could have Bletchley Park could get like 4 to 5,000 messages a day. It was enormous. But with that volume, that provides you opportunities to find patterns in messages, which helps you take educated guesses as to what the rotor combinations would be that you could test those. But in order to do that, you have to have a large volume of messages, and I'm kind of thinking the US probably didn't really generate that kind of traffic. So, but I could be wrong, but we'll find out eventually because we'll get to that. Because I think it's really fascinating how um, my fascination with rotor-based encryption machines and say like the Japanese language. I mean, you've got sets of you've got see in Japan, in fact, you've got kanji, and then you have katakana. Like you've got two alphabets, and they're character based. How do you represent a character in Morse code? How do you do that? I did a little reading, and what I found out is that they basically would assign they would assign a serial number to a particular Japanese character. So whatever character represents, say, ship, okay, it's some calligraphy, character. It's not alphabetic, but you could say this character. We're going to give it the number 01. Now we can key in a 01 on Morse code, and the receiving station knows when they see 01, okay, that's associated with this character. So that's how the Japanese could transmit character-based language messages. And that also then provided the United States the opportunity to do frequency analysis and employ other techniques. They could still do that, like Bletchley Park was doing with Enigma. So, okay. Well, I tell you what, we're coming up on an hour, and we've got 4 people watching. So, I am impressed. So, I think we'll probably wrap it up here in the next couple minutes. But the lighting is pretty good. The sound is working. I just have to. We just have to grow the channel a little bit more. But I think based on this experience, yeah, we'll definitely do this again. I don't know when. Maybe in another month. We'll see how the channel grows, and we'll see how my other content is coming along, and then we can get together and we can do this again. Because if we can get to the point where we've got like 10 or 15 people watching, it's at that point that we should start really getting questions generated, and then that could lead to a cycle where maybe like the first weekend of the month I do a live stream Q&A, and then a couple weeks later I do like an answer video where I answer those questions. And that would be nice because that would be like, that's like 2 additional pieces of content a month that I'm doing, because honestly, I would actually kind of prefer to do this kind of a format. The briefings take a lot of time. I mean, some of the briefings, it takes me, it's on average, it's taking me about 3 weeks to put a 15 to 20-minute briefing together. I've got to figure out what the topic is. I have to do the reading on the topic. I have to answer my own questions to make sure I understand the material. I have to start compiling the material into a series of slides. I have to find pictures. I have to make graphs or tables and charts. And it's actually really time intensive. I mean, it's like I can easily spend I can over a 3-week period of time, I can easily spend 20 to 40 hours putting a briefing together. So it can get exhausting. Now, having said that, I mean, I have enough topics where I doing one every 3 weeks. I could be doing this for a couple of years just on U-boats. Not to mention talking about other nations' navies. Not to mention like continuing to talk about like code breaking and cryptography and stuff, and then throwing in some like warship stuff, some stuff once in a while. Oh, yeah, there was something else I wanted to mention too. I have a copy of the rule book for the Avalon Hill game Submarine. This is one of Avalon Hill's games that they developed during the 70s and 80s. It's a counter and hex game, but it was designed to kind of like simulate convoy and submarine battle. So I have the rule book for it. Now this game has been out of print, probably 40 years. But I was able to find a digitized copy of the rule book, and through the Vassal engine, we can actually set up a virtual game and actually play it like two people were sitting in a room together. So I thought about doing a series on that, demonstrating basic gameplay, and then that maybe culminating in doing a series of videos showing maybe like a small showing how the game would work with like just like a very small convoy and a U-boat, just so you could demonstrate like this is how movement and combat takes place in the order and stuff. And people could actually use that, a guy watching it, if they wanted to actually experiment themselves with the game. Because yeah, we got submarine, we've got Silent Hunter series, we've got Wolfpack, we got U-boat. Computer games are great, I guess World of Warships, but a lot of submariners, yeah, turning in their grave anytime you mention something about submarines and World of Warships. But um, video gaming is fun. Obviously, it's kind of like neat and clean, but every once in a while, it's fun just to like move counters around on a hexagonal map, and you can set up like your own what if situations, and it doesn't require you to wait in a queue for 5 minutes to get thrown into a 20-minute team deathmatch in World of Warships, and your team gets sunk in the first 5 minutes. So that would be something else too that I would do on the channel. I think that might be of interest to some people. But okay, Charles, yeah, I'll definitely let you know. So I guess we're gonna wrap it up. We did go an hour. We had a couple questions, so that was fun. It looked like we had 6 people at one point. How about that? That wasn't too bad. So let's look for the Type 9 briefing before the end of January, and then I will continue to put like updates and stuff on the community tab. And then I'm doing casual, sometimes serious, but usually mostly shit posting on Twitter with under the handle Submarine History. So, but on that, thank you, Sir Fides. Yes, thank you. It's good to be back. Oh yeah, excellent. Navy retired. So, I'll do that here. So I was a Naval Reserve Civil Engineer Corps officer for 10 years. Okay, so I did that from '93 to 2003, and then in 2003, I actually transferred to the Ohio Army National Guard because I'm a civil engineer. So I was doing civil engineering work in the Navy. So I rolled over to the Army National Guard, and I was doing civil engineering for them. And I did that for a couple of years, and then we had some life circumstances and stuff, and I ended up actually going IRR like in 2006 from the National Guard, and I was actually out. And then in 2014, I came back in because I was looking at things, and I was like, "Geez, I'm running out of time if I want to try to get my 20 years in." So I actually came back in 2014, and I went back in with the National Guard as a 120 Alpha construction engineering technician warrant officer. So brown shoe. Oh, okay, yeah, that's nice. What are you doing on this channel? um, but it's kind of interesting having been on both sides of the Army Navy house doing something that's common work to both. You know what? Here I am, a civil engineer. You know what, Surfer? I love subs too. I find them really fascinating. I don't know that I would have ever wanted to serve on a submarine, probably because I know enough about them and how dangerous they actually are. Ah, man, I'm not sure that I would actually volunteer for submarine service. But what I love about subs is that there's just so much technology. Like you don't even really have to. Like, you can be interested in submarines and love them, and you don't really have to even understand anything about war because there's all the technology with the engines. How do they survive underwater? How do they communicate? How do they do this? How do they do that? It's just like all science and engineering, which is really cool. Of down periscope? Yeah. I actually have, I think on Amazon, I shouldn't say this, but I think I actually do. I do have a copy of Operation Petticoat. And I remember, I believe it was a TV show, I think for one season, I think back in the 80s. I have heard some people say that about Down Periscope. My personal favorite, Navy movie is probably In Harm's Way, which has a little bit of submarine action in it, but it was definitely, that's definitely the Navy I wanted to be in. I really felt shortchanged joining the Navy in the 1990s. But anyway, so, getting back full circle. So I actually came back in 2014, back into the National Guard, and I actually ended up retiring from there. So this was a, let's see, this is, so last year was 2020. So last year was an even number year. So we voted or so we rooted for Navy for the Army Navy game. And then in odd number years we root for Army. So that's how I handled that. I went I went AOCS. I should know that acronym, shouldn't I? Officer and gentleman was BS. Uh yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings about officer and gentleman. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We could probably just do a live stream just talking about Navy movies. All right, so I guess if there's no other questions, then I guess we'll just wrap it up, and then maybe we'll look at doing this again in February. All right, so everybody, thank you for tuning in to the Submarine History 500 subscriber live stream spectacular. And everybody, look forward to seeing you down the road, and peace out.